Some stories find us at just the right moment. This is one of those tales about two people who had every reason to give up on life, yet somehow found their way back to each other and to themselves. It is set in the summer of 1887 on a small ranch in the frontier West, where the land was hard but honest, and where a person's word still meant something. I wrote this for folks like you and me, those of us who understand that real love is not about grand gestures or pretty words. It is about showing up, day after day, even when your heart is heavy. It is about the quiet courage it takes to trust again after you have been hurt. So settle into your favorite chair, pour yourself a cup of coffee, and let me tell you about Silas West and the woman who arrived on the evening stage. The stagecoach was late. Silas West had been standing on the depot platform for 2 hours, though he would not have admitted it to anyone. He had positioned himself near the corner post where he could watch the road without looking like he was watching. His hat sat lower than usual, shadowing his face. Twice he walked to the water barrel and drank from the tin cup, though he was not thirsty. The depot clerk, a thin man with spectacles and ink-stained fingers, had stopped asking if Silas needed anything. Some men did not invite conversation. Silas West was one of them. The sun dropped toward the western hills, painting the sky in shades of copper and rust. Silas pulled his pocket watch from his vest, his grandfather's watch. The one thing he had not sold or lost during the bad years. 6:30. The stage should have arrived at 4. He touched the scar on his left wrist without thinking about it, an old habit. The raised tissue was hidden beneath his shirt cuff, but his fingers knew exactly where it was. A cloud of dust appeared on the horizon. Silas straightened. His hands, which had been restless all afternoon, went still at his sides. He watched the dust cloud grow larger, listened to the faint rumble of wheels and hooves gradually sharpen into the unmistakable clatter of a conquered stagecoach. The coach rounded the final bend and slowed as it approached the depot. 4 horses, lathered and blowing hard. The driver hauled back on the reins and set the brake with a grinding screech. "Thornfield," he called out. Though everyone could see where they were, the door opened. A heavy-set man in a bowler hat stepped down first, already mopping his forehead with a handkerchief. Behind him came a young mother clutching an infant wrapped in a yellowed blanket. The baby was crying, had probably been crying for miles, judging by the mother's exhausted face. Silas waited. A long moment passed. The driver climbed down and began untying luggage from the roof. The depot clerk emerged to collect the mail pouch. The heavyset man was already walking toward the saloon across the street. Then she appeared. A woman in a faded calico dress, patches visible at both elbows where the fabric had worn through and been mended. Her hair was dark, pulled back in a simple bun, though several strands had escaped during the long journey and now framed her face. She was thinner than her photograph had suggested, the photograph that had arrived 3 months ago with her letter agreeing to his proposal. She carried one bag, a battered carpet bag made of cracked leather, clutched against her stomach with both hands. Silas removed his hat. "Mrs. Vasquez." She looked up. Her eyes met his for exactly 1 heartbeat before sliding away to focus on something past his shoulder. "Mr. West." Her voice was flat, careful, the voice of someone who had learned not to expect much. "Long ride," Silas said. "You must be tired." I reckon I'm used to it. He reached for her bag. She did not release it. I can carry my own things. Mr. West? Yes, ma'am. I expect you can. He let his hand drop, gestured toward the buckboard wagon tied at the hitching post, where his horse stood waiting with the patience of an animal that had learned not to expect much either. Wagon's over here. Ranch is about an hour out. She nodded and walked past him, her worn boots raising small puffs of dust with each step. Silas watched her for a moment, the rigid set of her shoulders, the way her knuckles whitened around the carpetbag handle. He had seen men carry their belongings like that. Men in prison. Men who knew that everything they owned could be taken at any moment. He put his hat back on and followed her to the wagon. The ride was quiet. Silas pointed out landmarks as they passed the creek that marked the eastern boundary of his land, the old cottonwood tree that had been struck by lightning 3 summers back but refused to die, the spot where he had found a wolf den last spring. Elena nodded at each one. She did not ask questions. She did not look at him. The sun continued its descent, turning the endless grass into a sea of gold and amber. Silas stole glances at his passenger when he thought she was not paying attention. Her hands never loosened on the carpetbag in her lap. Her jaw was set in a way that spoke of long practice. He noticed the way her eyes moved, constantly scanning the horizon, checking the road behind them, returning to watch his hands on the reins, the eyes of someone who had learned to watch for danger. That's the place, he said finally. As they crested a small rise, the ranch spread out below them in the fading light. A cabin of weathered pine, smoke curling from the stone chimney, a barn that needed painting, a vegetable garden gone wild with neglect, split-rail fences marking out paddocks for horses he did not yet own, small, worn, but standing. It ain't much, Silas heard himself say. But the roof don't leak, mostly. She turned to look at him, then really look at him. For the first time since stepping off the stagecoach, her eyes moved across his face, down to the collar of his shirt where another scar was visible. Then back up to meet his gaze. I've seen worse. Mr. West. It was not a compliment, but it was not a rejection either. Silas clicked his tongue, and the horse started down the slope toward home. If this story speaks to your heart, I'd love to hear where you're reading from today. It warms my soul, knowing these old tales still find their way to good folks everywhere. The cabin smelled of wood smoke and lye soap. Elena stood in the doorway while Silas lit the coal oil lamp on the table. The flame caught and steadied, throwing shadows across whitewashed walls. A cast-iron stove, a pine table with 2 chairs, shelves lined with mason jars and a few chipped dishes. Clean. Everything was clean. Kitchen's here, Silas said, gesturing unnecessarily. Pumps out back, privy's past the chicken coop. Elena nodded. Her fingers ached from gripping the carpetbag. Silas crossed to a door on the far wall and pushed it open. He stepped aside, waiting for her to look. She did not move. This here would be your room, he said. Was my mother's. Before she passed, I aired it out this week, changed the linens. Elena's boots felt nailed to the floor. From where she stood, she could see the edge of an iron bedstead. A window with curtains that looked handmade. Something blue in a tin cup on the sill. Wildflowers. He had put wildflowers in her room. Go on, Silas said. Have a look. She made herself walk forward. One step, another. The doorway passed around her like a mouth. The room was small, a bed with a cornhusk mattress, covered by a quilt in colors that had faded soft with age cream and rose and pale green, stitched in interlocking rings, the pattern her grandmother had called double wedding ring, the kind of quilt a woman made for a daughter or a bride, the kind that took months of careful work. Elena's hand lifted toward the fabric. The stitches were tiny and even, made by someone who had time and thread to spare, someone who believed in making beautiful things. Her hand stopped an inch from the cloth. She pulled it back. "It's too much," she heard herself say. Silas stood in the doorway behind her. She could feel him watching. "Ma'am, the room, it's too—" She could not find the word. Too clean, too kind, too much like something she would have to pay for later, in ways she could not yet see. "It's just a room," Silas said. His voice was puzzled. Not angry, not yet. Elena turned to face him. Her back was to the bed now, to the quilt, to the wildflowers wilting in their tin cup. She made her face smooth. "Thank you, Mr. West. I'm sure I'll be comfortable." The words came out flat. Wrong. She watched something shift behind his eyes, confusion. Maybe. Or the first flicker of doubt. He nodded slowly. "Supper will be ready in half an hour." He left. His boots crossed the main room. The front door opened and closed. Elena stood alone in the room that smelled of lavender and fresh air. The quilt glowed in the lamplight like an accusation. She did not touch it. She did not sit on the bed. She stood with her carpetbag pressed against her chest and listened to the silence, waiting for whatever would happen next. The ceiling above his bed had 17 boards. Silas had counted them twice already. He lay on his back with his hands folded across his chest, listening to the silence of the house. The fire had burned down to embers. A cricket sang somewhere near the front porch, from the room across the cabin. Nothing. No creaking bed frame. No footsteps. No sound at all. Sleep was not coming. It rarely did on nights like this, when his mind circled back to places he had trained it to avoid. Silas swung his legs over the side of the bed. The floorboards were cool beneath his bare feet. He pulled on his boots without lacing them and grabbed his shirt from the chair. Outside. The air carried the sharp sweetness of summer grass and the faint musk of horses. A half-moon hung low in the sky, bright enough to cast shadows. Silas walked toward the barn, more out of habit than purpose. Checking the horses gave his hands something to do when his head would not quiet down. The barn door was open. He stopped mid-stride. He had latched that door himself before supper. He remembered the weight of the crossbar in his hands, the familiar thunk as it dropped into place. A thin line of light glowed through the gaps between the boards, lantern light, coming from the hayloft above. Silas approached slowly. The horses shifted in their stalls as he entered, recognizing his footsteps. He paused at the bottom of the ladder and listened, breathing, quick and shallow, with a hitch in it that sounded like someone trying not to make noise. He climbed. The rungs creaked under his weight. By the third one, the breathing above had stopped entirely. By the fifth, he could see over the edge of the loft floor. Elena was pressed into the far corner, her back against the rough planks of the barn wall. Her shawl was pulled up around her shoulders like a blanket. Hay clung to her hair. Her dress, the worn fabric of her sleeves, A kerosene lantern sat on a beam beside her, turned down low. Her eyes were red-rimmed. Her face was wet. She scrambled to her feet the moment she saw him. Hay scattered. The shawl slipped from her shoulders and puddled on the floor. "I'm sorry." The words tumbled out fast, tripping over each other. "I'll go back to the room. I only meant to. I wasn't trying to. Please, I'll go right now. I just—" Silas held up one hand. She stopped. Her chest heaved. Her fingers twisted together in front of her stomach. Knuckles white. He did not step closer. He stayed where he was, half in the loft and half on the ladder, and waited until her breathing slowed from a gallop to a trot. Then he climbed the rest of the way up and sat down on a hay bale near the ladder. A full arm's length between them, maybe more. Elena watched him the way a rabbit watches a hawk. "That room," Silas said. "The one I fixed up for you." She flinched. "You couldn't sleep in it." It was not a question. He saw the answer in the way her shoulders drew up toward her ears, the way her eyes dropped to the floor. "The quilt," she whispered. "The flowers. It was too—" She did not finish. She did not need to. Silas looked down at his hands. They were rough hands, scarred and calloused, the hands of a man who had done hard work and harder things. He turned his left arm over and began to roll up his sleeve. 12 years back, he said. I was a different man. Elena's gaze lifted. She watched his fingers work the fabric up past his wrist, past his forearm, exposing the long ridge of scar tissue that ran from his elbow nearly to his palm. I rode with some bad men, did bad things, stole money that wasn't mine, hurt folks who didn't deserve it. He traced the scar with one finger, following its path like a road on a map. This here came from a fight over cards. I was drunk. The other fellow had a knife. By the time it was over, he couldn't walk right anymore, and I had this to remember him by. The lantern flame flickered. Shadows jumped across the walls. I spent 2 years in a territorial prison. When I got out, I had nothing. No family that would claim me, no friends, no place to go. Silas let his sleeve fall back down. I came out here because there wasn't nobody to remember what I'd been. I could start over, be someone my grandfather wouldn't have spit on. He looked up. Elena had not moved. Her hands were still clasped together, but the white had faded from her knuckles. I don't know what you're running from, Silas said. I don't know what happened to you before you got on that stagecoach, and I ain't asking. That's your business, not mine. He stood, brushed hay from his trousers. But I figure you ought to know something. He met her eyes and held them. Around here, nobody's got the right to judge nobody. Not me, not you, not the horses or the chickens or the good Lord above. Whatever you did or didn't do before you came here, it don't matter none. You understand? Elena stared at him. Her lips parted, but no words came out. Silas walked to the ladder and put one foot on the top rung. That room's yours, he said. The quilt, the flowers. All of it. You don't owe me nothing for it. It's just a room. He climbed down without looking back. His boots found the barn floor. He walked past the horses, through the open door, out into the moonlight, behind him, in the hayloft. He heard Elena sink back down into the hay. He did not hear her cry, but he did not hear her leave. Either. Silas stood outside the barn for a long time, looking up at the stars, wondering what kind of life could make a woman afraid of clean sheets and wildflowers. Light crept through the window. Elena opened her eyes to unfamiliar walls. White, clean, the smell of lavender and old wood. For a moment she did not know where she was, and her body tensed the way it had learned to tense in the years since Marcus died. Then she remembered the stagecoach, the man with the scars, the hayloft. She was lying on the bed. The quilt was pulled up to her chin. She did not remember walking back to this room. She did not remember lying down. But here she was, and the pillow beneath her head was soft, and through the window she could see the pink edge of dawn spreading across the sky. Elena sat up slowly. Her dress was wrinkled from sleeping in it. Hay still clung to her hair. She picked out the pieces one by one and let them fall to the floor. Something caught her eye. A blue enamel pitcher sat on the floor just inside her door. Steam rose from it in thin curls. Beside it, a clean cloth folded into a square. She had not heard him put it there. Elena stood and walked to the pitcher. The water was warm. She dipped her fingers in and watched the ripples spread outward, distorting her reflection on the surface. He had heated water for her, carried it to her door, left it without knocking, without asking for thanks, without making her feel like she owed him something. She washed her face. The cloth smelled like plain soap. Nothing fancy. When she was done, she looked at herself in the small mirror hanging on the wall. The same face she had seen for 32 years. Tired, thin. But the eyes that looked back at her were different somehow. She could not name what had changed. The smell of coffee reached her before she opened the door. Silas stood at the stove with his back to her, pouring boiling water into a tin pot. Coffee grounds floated on the surface. He stirred them down with a wooden spoon and set the pot aside to steep. "Morning," he said without turning around. "Good morning. Mr. West?" He glanced over his shoulder. His eyes moved across her face, checking for something. Whatever he found there, it seemed to satisfy him. He turned back to the stove. "Coffee'll be ready in a minute. There's bread on the table. Butter's in the crock." Elena sat down. The chair scraped against the floor. The bread was coarse and brown, the kind that stuck to your ribs. She cut a slice and spread butter on it with a knife that had a chip in the handle. Silas brought the coffee pot to the table and poured 2 cups. The liquid was black as tar and smelled like it had been brewed by someone who valued strength over taste. Elena took a sip. Her throat burned. Her eyes watered. She took another sip. "It's good," she said. Silas looked at her. One corner of his mouth twitched. "No, it ain't." Elena set the cup down. "No, it ain't." They ate in silence. The bread was better than the coffee. Outside, a rooster crowed and was answered by another somewhere farther away. The sun climbed higher, pushing yellow light through the window and across the table between them. Silas finished his bread and brushed crumbs from his hands. He leaned back in his chair and looked at her straight on. "I got a list of work that needs doing," he said. "Fence posts are rotting on the north side, roof leaks over the barn when it rains hard. Vegetable garden's gone to seed because I ain't had time to tend it proper." Elena listened. Her hands stayed flat on the table. "This place," Silas continued. "It's more than one man can handle alone. That's part of why I wrote them letters. Posted that advertisement." He paused. But I ain't gonna make you work. You came here as a wife, not a hired hand. If you want to rest, you rest. Nobody'll say different." Elena looked down at her hands. The knuckles were rough. The nails were short and uneven. Hands that had scrubbed floors and washed dishes and pulled weeds in someone else's garden for years. "I know how to work," she said. "I figured you might." "The garden." She raised her eyes to meet his. "I can help with the garden. My mother had one, back in Ohio. Tomatoes, beans, squash. I used to—" She stopped. The words had come out before she could catch them. Her mother's garden, the smell of tomato vines in the summer heat, kneeling in the dirt with her hands deep in the soil, back before everything went wrong. Silas waited. He did not push. "I can help with the garden," Elena said again. Nothing more. "All right, then." He stood and carried his cup to the basin. Elena watched him rinse it out and set it on the shelf. His movements were unhurried, deliberate. The movements of a man who had learned patience the hard way. The garden was worse than she had expected. Weeds had taken over everything. The lettuce had bolted and gone to flower. Tall stalks with bitter leaves that no one would want to eat. Wild onions pushed up between the rows. The fence that was supposed to keep out rabbits had fallen down in 2 places. Silas handed her a pair of gloves that were too big for her hands. She put them on anyway. They worked side by side. Elena pulled weeds. Silas pulled weeds. Neither of them spoke. The sun rose higher, and the heat settled in, heavy and close. Sweat dripped down Elena's back, soaking into the fabric of her dress. She did not mind. This was something she understood. Dirt, roots, the satisfying resistance of a weed coming loose from the ground. Her hands knew what to do even when her mind did not. An hour passed. Maybe 2. The pile of pulled weeds grew into a small mountain at the edge of the plot. Elena straightened up to stretch her back. Her fingers were brown with soil. She looked at the dirt beneath her nails, at the lines in her palms filled with earth. The corners of her mouth moved. Not quite a smile, but close. My mother used to say. She stopped herself again. Silas kept pulling weeds. He did not look up. He did not ask. The silence stretched between them. But it was a different kind of silence now. Not the heavy silence of the wagon ride or the careful silence of the supper table. This was the silence of 2 people working toward the same purpose. 2 people who did not need to fill the air with words. Elena knelt back down and grabbed another handful of weeds. "She used to say you could tell a lot about a person by how they tended a garden," she said quietly. "Whether they had patience, whether they could wait for things to grow." Silas pulled a stubborn root from the ground, shook the dirt from it. "Sounds like a wise woman." "She was." Elena did not say anything more. Silas did not ask. They worked until the sun was directly overhead and the heat became too much to bear. As they walked back toward the cabin, Elena noticed something she had not seen before. A small wooden cross stood at the edge of the property, near a cottonwood tree. The wood was weathered gray, the letters carved into it too faded to read from this distance. "Mr. West," she said. He followed her gaze. "Who's buried there?" "My mother," Silas said. He did not look at the cross. His eyes stayed fixed on the horizon, on the line where the brown grass met the pale sky. "She passed 3 winters back. Fever took her. Doc came out from town, but there wasn't nothing to be done by then." Elena stood very still. The wind moved through the cottonwood leaves, making a sound like water running over stones. "I'm sorry," she said. "She was a good woman, better than I deserved." Silas turned and walked toward the cabin. "Come on, sun's getting mean. We can finish the garden tomorrow." Elena followed. She did not look back at the cross, but she felt its presence behind her, like a hand on her shoulder. The days found their rhythm. Elena woke each morning before the sun cleared the hills. She washed her face with water from the pitcher that always appeared outside her door. Still warm. Placed there by hands she never heard. She dressed in the same calico dress, mended now in 3 new places where the seams had given way, and walked out to meet the day. The chickens learned to expect her. They gathered at the coop door when they heard her footsteps, clucking and jostling for position. Elena scattered feed from a tin pail and counted them each morning. 12 hens and 1 rooster with a torn comb who crowed like he was trying to wake the dead. She named him General. The garden showed signs of recovery under her hands. She pulled the last of the weeds and turned the soil with a spade she found in the barn. The corn Silas had planted back in spring was already knee-high and climbing toward the summer sun. She tended it alongside the new seeds she had pressed into the dark earth beans. Squash. Tomatoes from yellowed packets she discovered in a kitchen drawer. The packets were old, but when she covered the seeds over, something in her chest loosened a little. Silas worked the heavier jobs. He replaced rotted fence posts on the north pasture, digging holes in the hard ground and setting new cedar poles that smelled sharp and clean. He patched the barn roof with salvaged shingles, climbing up and down the ladder a dozen times a day. He fed and watered the horses, brushed their coats until they shone, picked stones from their hooves with a patience that surprised her. They ate together. Breakfast at dawn, supper at dusk. The meals were simple salt pork, beans, cornbread, whatever vegetables Elena could coax from the recovering garden. They did not talk much, but the silence had changed. It was no longer the silence of strangers measuring each other. It was the silence of 2 people who had run out of things to prove. On the 5th day, Elena found the cookbook. It was tucked in the back of a cabinet, behind a stack of old newspapers and a broken clock. The cover was stained and the spine was cracked, but the pages inside were still readable. Handwritten notes filled the margins in a neat, slanted script. Add more salt than recipe calls for. Thomas likes it that way. Don't use the iron skillet, for this ruins the taste. Mama's version was better, but I can't remember what she did different. Elena ran her fingers over the words. Thomas. That must have been Silas's father, the man he never mentioned. She turned to a page marked with a ribbon. Biscuits. The recipe looked simple enough. Flour, lard, buttermilk, a pinch of salt. Elena gathered the ingredients and set to work. The dough was too dry. She added more buttermilk. Then it was too wet. She added more flour. By the time she got the consistency right, her arms ached from kneading, and there was flour in her hair and on her nose and dusted across the front of her dress. She cut the biscuits into rounds and put them in the oven. When Silas came in for supper, Elena set the plate on the table between them. The biscuits were brown on the outside, almost black on the bottom. She had scraped off the worst of it with a knife, but they still looked like something that had survived a fire. Silas picked one up, tapped it against the edge of his plate. It made a sound like a rock hitting wood. He bit into it anyway. Elena watched him chew, and chew, and chew some more. His jaw worked like he was trying to break down granite. "They're terrible," she said. He swallowed with visible effort, reached for another one. "They're tolerable. Mr. West, they could break a window." "I've eaten worse." He bit into the second biscuit. "Prison food would have killed a man faster than these." Elena stared at him. He kept chewing, his face perfectly straight. Then his mouth twitched. Just a little. Just at the corner. She felt something bubble up in her chest. Something she had not felt in so long she almost did not recognize it. She pressed her lips together, looked down at her plate. The bubbling feeling pushed harder. A sound escaped her. Half cough. Half something else. Silas looked up. His eyebrows rose. Elena covered her mouth with her hand. Her shoulders shook. The sound came again, louder this time, and she could not stop it. She was laughing. It felt strange in her throat. Rusty and unused, like a door that had been closed too long. But it came anyway, spilling out of her in short bursts that she could not control. Silas set down his biscuit. He watched her laugh with an expression she could not read. Then the corner of his mouth twitched again, and he shook his head slowly. "Woman," he said, "you just insulted your own cooking worse than I ever could." Elena laughed harder. Tears pricked at her eyes. She wiped them away with the back of her hand and took a shaky breath. "Tomorrow," she said. "Tomorrow I'll try again. I'll be here." The next week, Silas taught her to mend fences. They stood in the north pasture with the sun beating down on their backs. Silas held a post-hole digger, demonstrating the motion: lift, plunge, twist, pull. The dirt came up in dark clumps that smelled of earth and roots. "You try," he said. Elena took the digger. The handles were worn smooth from use, polished by years of palms gripping them just like this. She positioned it over the spot Silas had marked and drove it down. The blade hit rock. The impact jarred up through her arms and into her shoulders. She stumbled back a step, caught herself, tried again. Same result. The rock was buried just below the surface, immovable. "Move over 2 inches, Silas said. "Try there." She moved, drove the digger down again. This time it sank into soft earth. She twisted and pulled, and a scoop of dirt came up with it. "Good. Keep going." She dug. Her arms burned. Sweat ran down her temples and dripped from her chin. The hole grew deeper, 1 scoop at a time. When it was deep enough, Silas handed her a cedar post. She set it in the hole and held it steady while he packed dirt around the base, tamping it down with his boot heel. They moved to the next hole, and the next. By midday, Elena's hands were blistered even through the gloves. Her back ached in places she had forgotten existed, but when she looked down the fence line, she saw 6 new posts standing straight and tall where there had been nothing but rotted stumps before. "Not bad," Silas said. He was looking at the fence, not at her. "For a first try, the posts are stubborn. Posts are easy. It's the ground that fights you." Elena peeled off her gloves and examined her palms. Red welts were forming at the base of each finger. They would hurt worse tomorrow. "Like some men I've met," she said quietly. Silas turned to look at her. Something shifted in his expression, surprise. Maybe. Or amusement. "Did you just compare me to a fence post?" "I compared you to the ground." "That's worse." "Yes, it is." Ayrton held her gaze for a long moment. Then he bent down and picked up the post hole digger, slinging it over his shoulder. "Come on, Mrs. Vasquez. Ground ain't getting any softer standing here talking about it. That evening, Silas sat on the porch in the rocking chair that had belonged to his mother. The chair creaked with each slow rock, a rhythm as steady as a heartbeat. Elena sat on the top step, her arms wrapped around her knees. The sun was sinking behind the hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and deep purple. Fireflies had begun to blink in the tall grass near the garden, tiny lights appearing and disappearing like thoughts half-formed. Silas reached into his pocket and pulled out something small. A harmonica. The brass plates were tarnished and one corner was dented, but when he raised it to his lips and blew, sound came out, the wrong sound. Elena winced. The note was sour, warbling, like a cat with its tail caught in a door. Silas tried again, different holes this time. The result was no better. A melody attempted to form and collapsed almost immediately into a jumble of discordant squeaks. He lowered the harmonica and frowned at it. "Belonged to my grandfather," he said. "He could play anything on this thing. Hymns, dance tunes, songs I never learned the names of, made it look easy." He raised it again. Blew. The sound that emerged was somehow worse than before. Elena's shoulders began to shake. Silas stopped playing. He looked at her. She was pressing her hand over her mouth again, the way she had at supper with the biscuits. Her eyes were squeezed shut. Small sounds escaped between her fingers. "You laughing at me, Mrs. Vasquez?" She nodded. She could not help it. Silas looked at the harmonica in his hand, then back at her. "I reckon I deserve it." He turned the instrument over, examining it like it had betrayed him personally. "Fool thing never did like me much." Elena lowered her hand. The laughter faded, but something warm remained in its place, glowing in her chest like an ember. "How long you been trying to learn?" 20 years, give or take. "Maybe you ought to try something else." "Probably." He put the harmonica back in his pocket. "But I'm stubborn. Like the ground." The fireflies blinked. The rocking chair creaked. Somewhere in the barn, one of the horses stamped and blew. Silas leaned back and looked up at the sky, where the first stars were beginning to appear. "I don't know what I'm doing," he said. "With that harmonica, with this ranch, with any of it." Elena watched his profile against the darkening sky, the strong line of his jaw, the scars that disappeared beneath his collar. "Neither do I," she said. "But the fence is straighter than it was." He turned to look at her. The rocking chair went still. Neither of them spoke. The fireflies rose and fell in the gathering dusk, and the silence between them was not empty anymore. Then, from somewhere down the road, came the distant sound of hoofbeats approaching. Silas stood. The rider passed without stopping. Silas stood on the porch watching the dark shape disappear down the road toward town, just a silhouette against the fading light. A stranger. Probably. Someone passing through on the way to somewhere else. He sat back down. The rocking chair creaked. Elena released a breath she had not realized she was holding. "Expecting someone?" Silas asked. "No." He nodded and did not ask anything more. The next morning, Silas hitched the buckboard for a trip to town. "Need supplies," he said at breakfast. "Nails, flour, a few other things. You want to come along?" Elena shook her head. The thought of town of people, of eyes watching her, of questions she did not want to answer, made her stomach clench. I'll stay. There's work in the garden. Suit yourself. I'll be back before supper. She watched the wagon roll down the road until it disappeared behind the rise. Then she turned and walked toward the chicken coop, where General was already crowing his morning complaints. The hours passed slowly. Elena weeded the garden, fed the chickens, swept the cabin floor. She found herself looking toward the road more often than she liked to admit, watching for the dust cloud that would signal Silas's return. The sun was slanting toward afternoon when she heard the wagon. She walked out to meet him, wiping her hands on her apron. Silas pulled up near the barn and climbed down, moving stiffly the way he did when he had been sitting too long. "Got everything on the list," he said. He reached into the wagon bed and pulled out a sack of flour, then a smaller package wrapped in brown paper. "And this here came for you." He held out an envelope. Elena's hands stopped moving. The envelope was cream-colored, thick paper, the kind that cost money. The address was written in a slanted, precise script she recognized instantly, her sister-in-law's handwriting. "Postmaster said it came through Cleveland," Silas said. "Forwarded from your old address, then to your sister's place, then here. Must have been traveling a spell to find you." Elena took the envelope. The paper felt heavy in her hands. Wrong. Somehow. Like holding a snake that had not yet decided whether to bite. "Thank you," she said. Her voice came out flat. Silas watched her for a moment. Then he picked up the flour sack and carried it toward the cabin. Elena walked in the other direction, past the garden, past the chicken coop, around the side of the barn where no one could see her from the house. She leaned against the weathered boards and looked at the envelope. Her name was written across the front. Mrs. Elena Vasquez. The old name. The name she had tried to leave behind. Her fingers trembled as she broke the wax seal. The letter inside was 2 pages. The handwriting was the same careful script. Each letter formed with the precision of someone who had been taught that penmanship reflected character. "Dear Elena, your sister was kind enough to forward your new address to us. I cannot say I was surprised to learn you had run off to the frontier to find another man willing to take you in. It seems to be your particular talent, attaching yourself to those who can provide what you cannot earn on your own." Elena's throat tightened. She kept reading. "I want you to know that Marcus's memory deserves better than the shame you have brought upon it. Our family welcomed you despite your circumstances, despite the fact that you came to us with nothing but the clothes on your back and a talent for making yourself pitiful enough to inspire charity. We tolerated your presence for Marcus's sake. He was always too soft-hearted for his own good. But you should know that none of us ever believed you were worthy of him. His illness was a mercy in some ways. At least he was spared the indignity of watching you abandon his memory so quickly." Elena's vision blurred. She blinked hard, and the words swam back into focus. "I pray that whatever unfortunate soul has agreed to take you on will come to see what we always knew, that you are a burden. Elena, you always were. You always will be. Do not write to us again. Do not contact your sister regarding our family's affairs. As far as we are concerned, you ceased to exist the day you left Cleveland. Margaret Vasquez." The signature was neat and final, like a door slamming shut. Elena read the letter again, then a third time. Each word carved itself deeper into her chest, finding the places where the old wounds had never quite healed. A burden. Charity. Not worthy. She folded the letter carefully along its original creases. slid it back into the envelope. Her movements were slow and deliberate, the way she had learned to move when the feelings inside her became too big to contain. She walked to the garden. The hoe was leaning against the fence where she had left it that morning. She picked it up. The handle was rough under her palms, the wood worn smooth in some places and splintered in others. She started digging. Not weeding, not cultivating. Digging. The blade bit into the earth and turned it over in dark, heavy clumps. She swung again. And again. The impact jarred up through her arms and into her shoulders. But she did not stop. The tears came without warning. No sobs. No sounds. Just water streaming down her face while she attacked the ground like it had done her a personal wrong. She dug until her arms burned, until her back screamed, until the neat rows she had worked so hard to create were torn apart. The soil churned into chaos. She did not hear Silas approach. "Elena." She froze. The hoe hung in the air, poised for another strike. Her chest heaved. Sweat and tears mingled on her face, dripping from her chin. Silas stood at the edge of the garden. He was not looking at the mess she had made. He was looking at her. He did not ask what had happened. He did not ask to see the letter. He walked into the garden, mud sucking at his boots, and picked up the spare hoe from where it lay beside the fence. Then he started digging beside her. The sound of two blades striking earth filled the silence. Rise, fall, turn, rise again. The rhythm steadied something inside Elena's chest. She swung the hoe. Silas swung his. They worked side by side without speaking, tearing into the ground together. Finally. Elena stopped. Her arms hung at her sides, too heavy to lift anymore. Her breath came in ragged gasps. "They never let me forget," she said. Her voice was hoarse. "That I came from nothing. That I was charity they had to tolerate." But Silas drove his hoe into the ground and left it standing there. He turned to face her. "Who?" "My husband's family. His sister." Elena wiped her face with the back of her hand, smearing dirt across her cheeks. "They took me in when I had nowhere else to go. Fed me, clothed me, and they made sure I knew, every single day, that I didn't deserve none of it." Silas was quiet for a long moment. The sun beat down on them both, hot and unforgiving. "What did the letter say? That I'm a burden, that I always was?" Elena's voice cracked. "That Marcus, my husband, that his death was a mercy because at least he didn't have to watch me shame his memory." The words hung in the air between them, ugly and sharp. Silas reached out and pulled the hoe from the ground. He looked at it for a moment, then set it aside carefully, almost gently. "Elena," he said. It was the first time he had called her by her first name alone. "Look at me." She raised her eyes. "Around here," Silas said, "nobody gives charity and nobody takes it. You work, I work. We eat what we grow and fix what breaks and get through each day best we can." He held her gaze. "That woman in Cleveland don't know you. She don't know what you've done here. She don't know what you're worth." Something in Elena's chest cracked open, not broken more like a seed splitting its hull. She did not speak. She could not. Silas picked up both hoes and slung them over his shoulder. "Come on," he said. "Sun's going down. We ought to eat." He walked toward the cabin without looking back to see if she was following. Elena stood alone in the ruined garden, surrounded by churned earth and scattered soil. The letter was still in her apron pocket, pressing against her hip like a bruise. She pulled it out, looked at it one more time, Then she walked to the edge of the garden, where the compost pile steamed in the afternoon heat, and she buried the letter beneath the rotting leaves and vegetable scraps. When she turned back toward the cabin, she saw Silas standing in the doorway, watching her. He nodded once. She walked toward him, and somewhere behind the hills. Thunder rumbled. The sky turned green. Elena noticed it first, looking up from the bean plants she was tying to their stakes. The color was wrong, not the pale blue of a summer afternoon or the gray of ordinary clouds, but a sickly yellow-green that made the hair on her arms stand up. The air had gone still. Not quiet still. No birdsong, no insect hum. Even the wind had stopped, leaving a pressure against her eardrums that felt like being underwater. General stopped crowing mid-call. Silas came around the corner of the barn at a fast walk, his eyes fixed on the western horizon. Elena followed his gaze and saw it a wall of black clouds rising like a mountain range, moving toward them faster than any clouds had a right to move. "Storm coming," Silas said. "A bad one. We need to get the horses in." He was already running toward the pasture before he finished speaking. Elena dropped the twine and ran after him. The horses knew something was wrong. They were bunched together at the far corner of the paddock, ears flat, nostrils flaring. When Silas climbed the fence, they shied away from him, dancing on nervous hooves. "Easy," he called. "Easy now." The first gust of wind hit like a fist. Elena grabbed at her skirt as it whipped around her legs. Dust flew into her eyes, her mouth, coating her teeth with grit. She squinted through the stinging haze and saw Silas struggling to get a rope around the neck of the bay mare. "The gate," he shouted over the rising wind. "Open the gate to the barn." She ran. The gate latch was old and stubborn, the metal corroded from years of weather. Elena's fingers fumbled with it as the wind screamed around her, tearing at her hair, ripping pins loose until it streamed behind her like a dark flag. The latch gave. She hauled the gate open and pressed herself against it, holding it steady as Silas drove the horses toward her. They came at a gallop, wild-eyed and snorting. Elena felt the ground shake under their hooves. The first horse, the old gray gelding, thundered past her close enough that she felt the heat of his body. Then the bay mare. Then the spotted one Silas called Paint. Lightning split the sky. The crack of thunder came so fast it was almost simultaneous, a sound so loud Elena felt it in her chest. The rain arrived in the same instant, not drops but sheets, walls of water that turned the world into a blur of gray and brown. Elena could not see Silas. "Mr. West." The wind swallowed her voice. She stumbled toward the barn, one hand shielding her face from the stinging rain. Her boots slipped in mud that had not existed 30 seconds ago. She found him inside the barn, fighting to close the big doors against the wind. The horses were screaming in their stalls, kicking at the wooden walls. One of them, the bay mare, had gotten loose somehow and was rearing in the center aisle, hooves flashing. "Get back!" Silas shouted. Elena pressed herself against the wall. The mare's hooves came down inches from where she had been standing. Silas grabbed for the trailing rope. The mare reared again, and this time her hooves caught him in the shoulder, spinning him sideways. He went down hard on the packed dirt floor. The mare lunged toward the open door. Elena moved without thinking. She threw herself at the rope, caught it, felt the rough hemp burn across her palms as the mare dragged her forward. Her boots skidded through mud and manure. The smell filled her nose. Wet horse. Fear. The sharp tang of her own sweat. She dug in her heels. The mare pulled harder. Elena's feet went out from under her and she landed on her back in the muck, still holding the rope. The breath knocked out of her lungs. Mud soaked through her dress, into her hair, across her face. She could taste it, dirt and horse and rain all mixed together. The rope burned in her hands. Her arms screamed. Every instinct told her to let go. She did not let go. The mare stopped. Elena lay in the filth, gasping, staring up at the barn rafters. Rain drummed on the roof so loud she could barely hear herself think. The rope was still wrapped around her hands, cutting into her flesh. She was covered head to toe in muck, her dress ruined, her dignity somewhere in the mud beneath her. Slowly, carefully, she got to her knees, then to her feet. The mare stood trembling, head hanging, the fight gone out of her. "Easy," Elena whispered. Her voice shook. "Easy, girl. It's all right." She led the mare back to her stall and latched the door with fingers that would not stop trembling. Only then did she turn to look for Silas. He was sitting up, one hand pressed to his shoulder. His face was pale beneath the dirt and stubble. "You hurt?" He shook his head. "Just a knock. You—" Elena looked down at herself. Her dress was soaked through and plastered to her body. Mud covered her from shoulder to hem in her hair, on her face, under her fingernails. Her hands were raw and bleeding where the rope had torn the skin. She looked like something the creek had spit out, something even the pigs would turn their noses up at. She started to laugh. It came out broken at first, more like a sob. But then Silas was laughing too, a rough, scraped sound that mixed with hers and filled the barn while the storm raged outside. They secured the horses and the doors. They stumbled through the rain to the cabin, their boots sinking ankle-deep in mud with every step. By the time they reached the porch, there was not a dry inch on either of them. Elena stood in the kitchen, dripping onto the floorboards she had swept that morning. Water pooled around her boots. Her teeth chattered. She caught sight of herself in the small mirror by the door, hair matted with mud, face streaked with dirt, dress clinging to her like a second skin. She looked away. Silas knelt by the stove and coaxed the embers back to life, adding kindling until flames caught and held. He stood and pulled 2 blankets from the cedar chest by the wall, handing one to Elena without a word. She wrapped it around her shoulders. The wool scratched against her wet skin, but the warmth was worth it. "Coffee?" she asked. "Please." She filled the pot and set it on the stove. Her hands moved automatically, measuring grounds, adding water, finding cups. Normal motions in a night that had been anything but. They sat across from each other at the table, wrapped in their separate blankets, drinking coffee that was too hot and too strong. Rain hammered the roof. Wind howled around the corners of the cabin, searching for a way in. Elena lifted her cup and took a sip. Silas watched her over the rim of his own cup. The fire cast shifting shadows across his face. "You did good out there," he said. "With the mare. She almost trampled us both. But she didn't, because you held on." Elena looked down at her hands. The rope burns were red and angry against her pale skin. Tomorrow they would hurt worse. But tomorrow the horses would still be safe in their stalls, and the barn would still be standing. "I held on," she repeated softly. Silas set down his cup. He leaned back in his chair and looked at her, really looked, the way he had that first night in the hayloft. Lightning flashed outside the window, in that strobe of white light. Elena saw his face change. Something shifted behind his eyes, something she could not name. He opened his mouth as if to speak. Then the thunder came, and the moment passed. But the way he had looked at her that stayed, and Elena found herself wondering, for the first time, what it would mean if she let herself look back. The corn stood taller than Elena's head. She walked between the rows with her hands trailing along the leaves, feeling them brush against her palms like rough silk. The stalks had grown thick and strong over the summer, their tassels golden against the deep blue September sky. The ears hung heavy beneath their husks. Ready for harvest. Silas had planted this field back in spring, before she arrived. But she had tended it alongside him, watering, weeding, watching it climb toward the sun week after week. Now the corn rose around her like a green cathedral, whispering secrets in a language she was only beginning to understand. Silas walked a few rows over. She could not see him through the dense growth, but she heard the rustle of his passage, the occasional crack of a stalk he brushed too hard. They were checking the crop, looking for signs of rot or pest damage, making sure the ears were filling out properly. "Looking good over here," he called. Elena pulled back a husk and examined the kernels beneath. They were fat and yellow, packed tight against each other in neat rows. She let the husk fall back into place and moved on. The field ended at a split-rail fence that marked the boundary between cultivated land and open prairie. Elena reached it first and leaned against the top rail. Looking out at the grass that stretched toward the horizon in endless waves of gold and brown, Silas emerged from the corn a moment later. He stopped beside her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. The sun had darkened his skin over the summer, deepening the lines around his eyes and turning his forearms the color of old leather. Neither of them spoke. The wind moved through the corn behind them, making the leaves rattle and hiss. Silas reached into his pocket. Elena watched his hand disappear beneath the worn fabric of his vest. When it came out again, it was holding something small, something blue. A ribbon. Elena stared at it. The color was the deep, clear blue of a summer sky. The fabric smooth and shiny satin. Maybe, or something close to it. The kind of ribbon a woman might wear in her hair on Sundays. The kind of ribbon that cost real money at the general store. "I bought this a while back," Silas said. His voice was rough. "That day I went to town for supplies. I saw it in the window and I thought..." He stopped. His jaw worked like he was chewing on words that would not come out right. "I've been carrying it around for weeks now, like a fool." He turned the ribbon over in his fingers. "Kept telling myself I'd find the right time to give it to you. Kept finding reasons why it wasn't the right time yet." He held it out to her. The ribbon dangled from his fingers, twisting slightly in the breeze. Elena did not take it. She looked at the ribbon, then at his face, then back at the ribbon again. Her hands stayed at her sides, gripping the fence rail so hard her knuckles ached. "Why?" she asked. Silas frowned. "Why what? Why would you buy me something like this?" She heard the edge in her own voice and could not smooth it away. "What do you want in return?" The question hung between them, sharp and ugly. Elena hated the sound of it, the suspicion, the fear, but she could not stop the words from coming. I don't understand what you want from me. Mr. West? I cook your meals, I tend your garden, I work beside you every day, and you give me a room I couldn't bring myself to sleep in, and flowers I was afraid to touch, and now this. She gestured at the ribbon. This thing I didn't ask for, and don't deserve. Her voice cracked on the last word. Silas lowered his hand. The ribbon hung limp at his side. You think this is payment, he said quietly. For services rendered. What else would it be? A gift. Elena, just a gift. Folks don't give gifts without expecting something. Some folks do. Elena laughed. It was not a nice sound. Not in my experience. Silas turned to face her fully. His eyes searched her face with an intensity that made her want to look away. What happened to you? He asked. Before you came here. What did they do to make you think kindness always comes with a price? Elena's throat closed up. She tried to swallow and could not. The letter, she heard herself say. The one from Marcus's sister. Silas waited. She wrote that I was a burden, that I came from nothing and would never be nothing more than what I was. Elena's hands were shaking now. She pressed them harder against the fence rail. She wrote that my husband's family only tolerated me because Marcus was too soft-hearted to see what I really was. She wrote that his death was a mercy, that at least he was spared the shame of watching me drag his name through the dirt. The words poured out of her like water from a cracked jug. She could not stop them. For 5 years I lived in that house. I cleaned their floors and washed their clothes and cooked their meals and said thank you for every scrap they threw me. And every single day, every single one, they found new ways to remind me that I didn't belong, that I was charity, that I ought to be grateful they didn't put me out on the street. Her voice was raw now, scraped thin. When Marcus died, I thought maybe it would get better, maybe without him there. They'd see me as something other than the poor relation they were stuck with. But it only got worse. They blamed me for his death, said I'd worn him down, taken too much from him, drained the life out of him with my neediness. She was crying. She had not realized it until she felt the tears dripping from her chin. So I ran. I answered an advertisement in a newspaper, and I got on a stagecoach, and I came here to marry a stranger because anything at all was better than staying in that house one more day. She turned to face Silas. Her eyes were swollen. Her nose was running. She looked nothing like the composed woman who had stepped off the stage 2 months ago. And now you stand here offering me ribbons and telling me I don't owe you nothing. And I want to believe you. I want to believe it so bad it hurts, but I don't know how. Silas did not move. He stood there with the ribbon in his hand and the sun on his face, and he listened to every word she said without interrupting. When she was done, when she had emptied herself out and had nothing left to give, he took a single step toward her. They were wrong, he said. Elena shook her head. You don't know. They were wrong. His voice was firm, not loud, not angry, just certain. Every word they told you was a lie. You ain't a burden. You ain't charity. You're the hardest working person I ever known, and this ranch would be falling apart without you. He held up the ribbon again. I bought this because I wanted to, because I saw it and I thought of you, and I wanted you to have something beautiful. That's all. No payment, no expectations, just a man who figures the woman he lives with deserves something nice once in a while. Elena stared at him. The tears had stopped, but her face was still wet. "Take it," Silas said. "Or don't. It's yours either way." She reached out. Her fingers brushed against his as she took the ribbon. The contact sent a shock through her skin. Small, but unmistakable. She looked down at the blue fabric in her palm. It seemed to glow in the sunlight. Too bright and too pretty for someone like her. But Silas did not think she was someone like her. Silas thought she deserved something beautiful. Elena raised her hands and gathered her hair at the nape of her neck. She wound the ribbon around once, twice, and tied it in a simple bow. The satin was cool and smooth against her skin. She turned to face him. "I want to stay," she said. The words came out unsteady at first, then stronger. "Not because I got nowhere else to go. Not because you feed me or give me a roof over my head." She paused, drew a breath. "I want to stay because I choose to. I choose this place. I choose this life." Her voice steadied. "I choose you." Silas stood very still. The wind moved through the corn. The sun blazed down from a cloudless sky. Then he reached out and took her hand. His palm was rough with calluses, warm from the sun. His fingers closed around hers gently, like he was holding something fragile. "Then stay," he said. They stood there at the edge of the cornfield, hand in hand, looking out at the land they had worked together, the land they would harvest together, the land they would build on together. Elena felt something shift inside her chest, not a breaking, more like a settling, like pieces that had been scattered for years were finally finding their way home. "Silas," she said. It was the first time she had used his name without the Mr. in front of it. He turned to look at her. "What happens now?" The harvest began at first light. Elena stood at the edge of the cornfield with a sickle in her hand, watching the sun climb above the eastern hills. The sky was pink and gold, streaked with thin clouds that caught the light and held it. The corn stretched out before her in endless rows, the stalks heavy with their burden, ready to give up what they had been growing all summer. Silas came up beside her, his own sickle resting against his shoulder. He did not speak. They had said everything that needed saying at the edge of this same field 3 days ago. Now there was only the work. Elena stepped into the first row and began to cut. The rhythm came naturally. Reach, grab, slice. The stalk fell. She gathered it with the others, binding them into a bundle with twine she had measured and cut the night before. Reach, grab, slice. Another stalk. Another bundle. The sun rose higher. Sweat gathered at Elena's temples and trickled down the sides of her face. Her arms ached from the repetitive motion. Her back complained each time she bent to gather the fallen stalks. She did not stop. Silas worked 2 rows over, his sickle flashing in the sunlight. She could hear the steady swish of his blade, the thump of stalks hitting the ground, the rustle of corn leaves as he moved through them. They did not talk. They did not need to. By mid-morning, they had cleared a quarter of the field. The bundles stood in neat rows behind them, waiting to be loaded onto the wagon. Elena straightened up to stretch her back and looked at what they had done. It was real. All of it. The work, the sweat, the aching muscles. They had built something here. Something that would feed them through the winter. Something that proved they could survive. She started humming. The tune came from somewhere deep in her memory. A place she had not visited in years. Her mother's kitchen on Sunday mornings. The smell of bread baking in the oven. Sunlight falling through the window onto the scrubbed pine floor. her mother's voice rising and falling in the familiar melody of a hymn Elena had learned before she could read. The humming turned to words. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound, that saved a wretch like me. Her voice was rough from disuse, cracking on the high notes. But the words came anyway, pulled out of her by something stronger than habit or memory. I once was lost, but now am found. Was blind, but now I see. She kept cutting as she sang. Reach, grab, slice. The corn fell around her. The sound of Silas's sickle stopped. Elena did not look up. She kept singing, kept working, kept moving through the rows with the sun beating down on her back and the sweat soaking through her dress. Through many dangers, toils and snares, I have already come. 'Tis grace hath brought me safe thus far, and grace will lead me home. The last note faded into the rustle of corn leaves. Elena straightened up and turned around. Silas was standing 3 rows away, his sickle hanging forgotten at his side. He was looking at her with an expression she had never seen on his face before. Something soft, something wondering. I didn't know you could sing, he said. Elena wiped her forehead with the back of her hand. I haven't. Not in a long time. Why not? She thought about it. The answer was complicated years of silence, of making herself small, of learning that drawing attention was dangerous. But standing here in the cornfield with dirt on her hands and music still echoing in her chest, the answer seemed simpler. There wasn't nothing to sing about, she said. Before. Silas nodded slowly. He did not ask what had changed. He did not need to. They worked through the afternoon. The pile of bundled corn grew higher. Elena's voice grew stronger, moving from hymns to work songs to half-remembered melodies from her childhood. Sometimes Silas joined in, his bass voice rough and off-key but earnest. Mostly he just listened. By late afternoon, the field was bare. Elena stood amid the stubble, looking at rows of harvested corn that stretched from one fence to the other. Her arms hung heavy at her sides. Every muscle in her body ached. Her dress was soaked through with sweat and stained with dirt and corn silk. She had never felt so tired in her life. She had never felt so alive. They loaded the wagon as the sun began its descent. Bundle after bundle, stacked and secured with rope until the wagon groaned under the weight. The horses stamped and shifted, eager to be done with the day. Supper that night was simple beans and cornbread, vegetables from the garden Elena had brought back from the dead. They ate in comfortable silence, too tired for conversation, too satisfied to need it. Elena set a plate of biscuits on the table between them. Silas picked one up, turned it over in his hand, tapped it against his plate. It did not make a sound like a rock hitting wood. He bit into it, chewed, swallowed. These are good, he said. They're tolerable. No. He reached for another one. They're good. Elena felt something warm spread through her chest. She had practiced every day for weeks, adjusted the recipe, learned the quirks of the old stove, and now, finally, she had made something worth eating. When the plates were cleared, Silas poured 2 cups of coffee and carried them to the table. He sat down across from her and wrapped his hands around his cup, staring into the dark liquid like he was reading something written there. I've been thinking, he said. Elena waited. About us. About this arrangement we got. Her stomach tightened. She set down her cup. We got married by proxy. Silas continued. Signed papers in different states. Never even met face to face until you stepped off that stagecoach. Legal, I reckon, but not... He paused, searching for the right word. Not real. Elena's hands were flat on the table. She did not trust herself to speak. I figure we ought to do it proper, Silas said. He raised his eyes to meet hers. Renew our vows in the church in town, with a preacher and witnesses and your name written next to mine in the book. Elena's breath caught. I ain't good with words, Silas said. Never have been. But I know what I want. I want you here. Not because of some paper we signed. Not because you got nowhere else to go. I want you here because you belong here. Because this place ain't home without you in it. He reached across the table and took her hand. Marry me, Elena. For real this time. She looked at their joined hands. His fingers were rough and scarred, the nails rimmed with dirt that no amount of scrubbing would ever fully remove. Working hands. Honest hands. Hands that had never hurt her, never demanded anything from her, never taken more than she was willing to give. Yes, she said. The word came out steady, certain, no hesitation, no doubt, no fear. Yes, she said again, because it felt good to say it. I'll marry you, for real. Silas's hand tightened around hers. His face did not change much. He was not a man given to dramatic expressions, but something shifted in his eyes. Something warm and deep that she recognized, because she felt it too. They sat there holding hands across the kitchen table, while the last light faded from the windows and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. That night, Elena slept in her room with the quilt pulled up to her chin, and the blue ribbon coiled on the nightstand beside her. For the first time since she arrived. She did not dream of Cleveland or Margaret's letter or the years of silence and shame. She dreamed of corn growing in summer light, of a man's rough hand holding hers, of a home that was finally, truly hers. She woke before dawn. The cabin was quiet. The fire had burned down to embers in the stove. Elena wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and padded to the kitchen in bare feet, moving softly so as not to wake Silas. But he was already up. She found him on the front porch, leaning against the railing with a tin cup in his hands. Steam rose from the coffee in thin curls. He was looking east, toward the line of hills where the sky was just beginning to lighten. Couldn't sleep, she asked. Wanted to see the sunrise. She moved to stand next to him at the railing. He handed her his cup without being asked. She took a sip, strong and bitter, the way he always made it, and handed it back. The sky turned from black to purple to pink. The first edge of the sun appeared above the hills, painting everything in shades of gold. Elena looked out at the land that stretched before them, the harvested field with its neat rows of stubble, the garden where squash and beans were still ripening on the vine, the barn, the chicken coop, the fence line they had mended together, the small wooden cross beneath the cottonwood tree where Silas's mother slept. All of it touched by the rising sun, all of it theirs. She leaned her shoulder against Silas's arm. He did not pull away. They stood there together as the sun climbed higher and the light spread across the prairie. The coffee grew cold in the cup between them, somewhere in the barn. General began his morning crowing, and the horses stamped in their stalls, ready for another day. Elena thought about the woman who had stepped off the stagecoach 2 months ago. The woman with the battered carpet bag, and the careful eyes and the heart so bruised she was afraid to touch a clean quilt. That woman seemed like a stranger now. Someone she had known once, a long time ago, in a life that belonged to somebody else. She was not that woman anymore. She was Elena West, wife, partner, farmer. She had planted seeds and pulled weeds and mended fences. She had laughed at burnt biscuits and bad harmonica playing. She had held a terrified horse steady in a storm and buried a poisonous letter in a compost pile. She had cried in a hayloft and confessed her shame in a cornfield and said yes to a man who asked for nothing but herself. She had earned this moment. The sun broke fully over the hills, flooding the world with light. Elena closed her eyes and let it warm her face. She was home. There is a quietness that comes after a story like this one, a kind of tenderness that settles in the chest and asks nothing of us except to sit with it a while. Perhaps you recognized something in Elena, the way she flinched from kindness, because kindness had always come with conditions. Or perhaps you saw yourself in Silas, carrying old mistakes like stones in your pockets, wondering if you would ever be light enough to deserve good things again. Many of us have stood in rooms that felt too clean for us. Many of us have loved people who made us feel small, and carried that smallness long after we walked away. Some of us are still learning that we are allowed to take up space, to accept gifts without suspicion, to believe that someone might want us exactly as we are. It is all right if this story stirred something that does not have a name. It is all right if it opened a door you thought you had closed. These things do not need to be resolved tonight. They are allowed to simply rest. Thank you for staying until the end. It has been my honor to share this quiet hour with you.